Yes, this is Bill Jones again from Freedom's Nest. Another presentation from Freedom's Nest, which is from recapturefederalism.com. That's my website. Human rights activist. That's what it's all about. And that's all about politics and everything else. And to me, as I've said in the past, the Holy Bible is political science from cover to cover. Today's presentation is titled and is about CBS, pro-communist propaganda again. That's correct. And before we get into that, of course, I do what I do every presentation. I, William R. Jones, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that it will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. So help me God. And that's what. So help me God. That's part of it. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Last week, I guess it was Thursday or Friday, I happened, and purely accidental I might add, that I happened to be listening to CBS Evening News, Scott Pelley, and I heard him do a story. In fact, they were teasing it before they came on, about Negroes and the term black. And well, I'm gonna and I'm white, so let's start out by saying that. But this is dear to my heart. I've been anti-communist since I was 15 years old. And yes, it has to do with communism. The story had to do, the piece that they were running had to do that somehow the term for black, or for Negro, came from Dr. Martin Luther King. They tied him into there, and yet they didn't go any farther than that, really, to the origin and the source of the term black as a description of Negroes. First of all, it originally started, the Spanish sociologist, through their investigations and research, came up with the fact that there are three major classifications of races. And ethnic groups, that's a different story. That has nothing to do with races. There are standards, and if you remember the O.J. Simpson trial, they went into some of that too, where with some of the evidence that was there from a person who's a Negro. Now, where this, because it's a derivation off of the term, the original term in Spanish, which is Negroid. There's Negroids, there's Mongoloids, and there's Caucasians. And of course, when you have intermarrying and interracial, you get a multi-racial situation, whether it be between Mongoloid, Caucasian, or Negroid. And that's where the term comes from, Negroid. And it has to do with the pigmentation coloring of the three basic major groups. Ethnicity comes in here because of where some of the people come from. This black as a term, of course, Negro in Spanish is black. But why not just say Negro and leave it at that? That's where the original scientific studies were done. No. You see, black, now we're getting into the communist origin for that term. Yes, there is a origin, communist term. But let's get back to Martin Luther King, Jr. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. in his work down in Alabama in 1963, was arrested. He broke some laws. And he while he was in jail, he hand wrote, letter from the Birmingham jail. It's 48 paragraphs long. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but throughout that document, and I think to me it is the best document ever written in the 20th century. He uses the term Negro. And in fact, I am a Negro brother. Also, it is, of course, the famous document where the quote comes from, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's about in the fourth or fifth paragraph of the letter from Birmingham jail. Of course, it's also famous, this document's also famous for the, and I'll quote here, in any nonviolent campaign there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. And that's the basis that Dr. King had for a nonviolent campaign to stand up for freedom and justice. And that's why was he down in Alabama? When he was down in Alabama, it had to do with the discriminatory election process. And I won't get too deep into that right now. I will some other time, I'm sure. Because what has happened, Democrats down there were discriminating on racial basis against Negroes. We have the exact opposite right now. We have Democrats who discriminate. For instance, I'm from Illinois, and the redistricting, I'll tell you right now, is discrimination against white Christians. But that's another presentation. Now, Mr. King goes along further. He mentions, not the term, but he mentions the practice of gerrymandering. He doesn't use that term, but he does. And then a couple paragraphs after that, he's talking about injustice and what's legal and what's illegal. And here's a paragraph here. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was, quote, legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. He mentions the Hungarians, the Hungarian Revolution, 1956. This letter was written in 1963. He talks about being anti-communist at this point, that he would be with the Hungarian freedom fighters rather than the communists. You see, the big lie that's told about Dr. King is that somehow he was affiliated and supported communism. That's the farthest thing from the truth. In 1963, when he wrote this letter from Birmingham jail, he's very specific in here. And this is where we get involved with the term black. And I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs, 2 paragraphs, that have to do with the term black. I quote, "You speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I began thinking about the fact that stand in the middle of the two opposing forces in the Negro community. One is the force of complacency, made up in part of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so drained of self-respect and sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And in part of a few middle-class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred that comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various black nationalist groups that are springing up across the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement, nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination. This movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who absolutely repudiate Christianity, and have concluded that the white man is an incorrigible, quote, devil, unquote. Next paragraph. I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need to emulate neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the black nationalist, for there is more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. And here you go. Of course, he's talking about struggle. Most people consider that communist, and there are strategies by the communists to do that, class warfare. But that's not, when King talks about that, that's not what he's referring to about the communist class struggle. He's talking about the struggle for freedom, anti-communism to be exact. And he talks about black nationalists. And at the time of the 60s, we have the introduction and expansion of the revolutionary movement, heavily dominated by black nationalists, black Muslims. I would also note that presently the Southern Poverty Law Center has on their list the black Muslims, the Nation of Islam, headquarters out of Chicago, and Louis Farragut presently, and also the new Black Panthers. They're on those lists as hate groups. Yes, Black Panthers. They use the term black, don't they? Because they are a Marxist-based organization. Black nationalists, black separatists. As King talks of bitterness and hatred that comes from them. And we have violence at times too. So you see, the base comes from communism. And I'm going to go relate to that right now. In the guidelines of the organizational structure of the Communist parties, 1921, there is a section in Section 4 on propaganda and agitation. That's why I have in my title about propaganda. The press in America is very good at it. They've become very, very good party workers in the promotion of propaganda and agitation. They've worked very, very good, especially with the Democrats, on promoting the communist cause. And how is that related to Negro and black? Well, I'm going to tell you how it is. In line item 21 of section 4, propaganda. This is what they say, and I'm going to quote this paragraph because their words, not mine. Communism, all this stuff. Like I say, I've been anti-communist over 50 years. But this is what it says, and I'll quote: in countries where national minorities form part of the population, it is the party's duty to devote the necessary attention to propaganda and agitation among the proletarian layers of these minorities. This agitation and propaganda must obviously be conducted in the languages of the respective national minorities. Appropriate party organs must be created for this purpose. Party organs. That's the press, okay? The press, because that's section 6, the press, and I'm going to be doing a presentation here probably this week about getting deeply involved in section 6. But we're in section 4. Must obviously be conducted in the language of the respective national minorities. So you take a minority such as Negro, okay? There have been, and it still is used, and some it's okay to be used by people of that minority when they say colored, people of colored community. Civil War was colored troops, and it was somewhat of a benign term to distinguish between white and Negro. Whether it's good or not, I don't know. But communists use this stuff to agitation, to draw things up, to make difficulty, instead of having love for one another and a good association with one another. No, they promote the hatred and the violence and the segregation, I might add. Get them all together, the minority, so you can maintain your power, get them to vote for you, gerrymander, and what have you. And you do that by telling them that they're special, to have black pride. Dr. King, traditional Christian, he'd be the first one to tell you the 7 deadly sins, pride is the deadliest of all. And yet that's what they use. And they try and single out people, separate people, not by the scientific term, but by the communist term, black, Afrocentric. That's how they do that. Similarly, in the 70s, when we had the Phil Donahueization of America, and he promoted that also, the idea of black as a superior language over Negro. He also did it for, went from a scientific term of homosexual to gay. That's right. That's another way of doing it too, to promote the communist agenda. They do that through propaganda and agitation, deception, distraction, deflection. And that's what black is over Negro. I have said in the past, I'm going to use Negro, because that's what Dr. Martin Luther King wanted. And I have a far greater respect for him than I do for the communist. Until next time, good day.